Okay, let's turn our Bibles to Proverbs 21. Proverbs 21. Max actually did the devotional Tuesday night, even though he was in Tucson, I think, at reserve duty. But he just selected a couple verses out of Proverbs 21 that we did on our Zoom Tuesday night devotional. So I know that Taya and Ashton are going to be all over this study here. Ashton's looking at me with big eyes. I'm just teasing you girls. Let's read through chapter 21. Gary, do you mind just reading straight through all 31 verses, just so we kind of get the flavor of this entire chapter? Chapter 21, verses 1 through 31. Ooh, good. Thank you. Well, I say let's just pick out a couple of verses that jump out at us and talk about them. We're not going to have time to talk about the whole chapter, but I do feel like sometimes we gloss over some of the verses in Proverbs because we think that they're not as significant as another verse. And I feel like sometimes we do that to our detriment because I feel like each verse really has so much value in it. Let's look at verse 1. The king's heart is like channels of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he wishes. And I thought this was so appropriate for what we have going on right now, since we have an election getting ready to happen. And this is talking about a king, but this could be applied to any leadership position. And I think it could be applied to any individual's heart. What do you think that Solomon means by the king's heart is like channels of water? What could he mean by that? Channels of water. Any thought about what that might be referring to, or what mental imagery does that maybe bring to mind? So what do you make of what's the significance of the channels of water? Larry kind of mentioned that. It's that the mind is similar to a channel of water and that you can direct it. You can dam it up. You can make the water go this way or that way. Well, I think that's a good point. And I don't know if you noticed, a lot of what was being discussed as Gary read through this had to do with justice and equality, making proper decisions. That was discussed a lot in here. And I think that the idea, we go by these farms and agricultural pieces of land where you can see that they've got rows and rows and rows where they planted things in, and then when they want to water it, they turn on water down at the end of one of those rows, and the water just starts flowing down. Now, if they want to divert the water this way or that way to get to something that needs more water, the farmer can do that, right? They just go and they trench the dirt out a little bit further over that way, so they make it to that grove over there, or those plants over there, or they dam it up here so it can't go there, and they divert more this way. And I think what it's saying is that, especially when you get into the second part of this, it says the king's heart is like channels of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he wishes. It gives you the idea that just as easy as it is for a farmer to direct water here or there or stop it up here, God is in control of these kings and these leaders, these politicians. He has absolute capacity to guide them. How exactly he does that, I don't know, but somehow through his providence, he's able to influence them however he wants. And apparently it's as easy as guiding the water in channels, just like you see on a piece of farmland. And I thought, wow, boy, we need to remember that as we get into this election. Sometimes we're disappointed with this person or that person that gets elected, but what we're being told right here is that, you know what? God is in complete control. He can control the mind and the heart of these individuals. He can influence it in ways that we can't understand, but apparently it's as easy as guiding the water down the channels, just like on a piece of farmland. And how comforting is that to know that regardless of who is installed in any particular office, God's in control of them. He can control it. He can move them like chess pieces on a board and accomplish whatever goal it is that he wants to accomplish. Anybody else have a thought on that? No? Okay. What do you make about, I liked also verse 2, kind of the imagery of it. Every man's way is right in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the hearts. Does anybody have a different translation on that? But the Lord weighs the hearts. Does anybody's Bible phrase that different? Every man's way is right in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the hearts. Let's take the first part of that. Every man's way is right in his own eyes. I think that's pretty self-evident what that means. Right, right. I think that mankind in general thinks that the pathway that they have chosen in life, I think man is often conceited enough to think that that's always the right way. In fact, it's kind of been what we've been teaching to several generation of people in our schools. Hey, if you think it's right, it must be right. If you think 2 + 2 = 5, well, as long as you can explain it to me, that's all right. You know, and how silly is that? But what we learn in the very next clause of verse 2, but the Lord weighs the hearts. The Lord, what do you think that means?
It's going to be a judgment.
Yeah.
Regardless of how you feel about what you're doing, the Lord will judge
Yeah.
whether you're right or not.
Yeah, he has the standard. It's almost like, hey, there's a scale. He's saying he weighs the heart, or he searches the heart. You kind of get this imagery of like a set of scales. And on one side, we got justice, and we got righteousness, and we have truth in it. And then on the other side of the scale, we got what's in the heart of mankind, and how are you going to measure up to that? And that idea of a scale or weighing the hearts, you know, it just brings a real vivid picture to my mind that there will be a day of judgment. And sometimes I feel like that judgment is in part rendered in this life. I feel like, in general, if you lead a life that is sinful, that is contrary to God's precepts, you end up having a much more difficult life in general. Now, we don't always see that. A lot of times we look at somebody and we think, well, why does that person have it so good? I know that person to be a bad person. You know, they're always cheating, they're always stealing, they're always doing this, they're always doing that. And it seems like they got life so good. Why is that? Why is God allowing that to happen? But I would say that by and large, people that lead their lives contrary to God's instructions encounter much, much, much more difficulty in life. I think I was telling some of the teens, I was thinking about Paul McKissick's grandkids. And, you know, Paul was such a faithful servant in the church, and he did so much work here. His kids were not faithful. And then, in turn, neither were their kids. And it's been amazing to see the detrimental effects of their decision not to lead faithful Christian lives. They headed down pathways that were so destructive. I don't know if you know this, but both of his children have passed away, and Paul is still living. But both of his adult kids have passed away at fairly young ages because they had lived such difficult lives by their own choosing. And Paul was, always trying to work with them, always helping them. And now you see the next generation being affected in the same way because of the decision of Paul's kids. Now the grandkids struggling. Very difficult time making good decisions. And it's really, really sad to see because Paul was such a faithful, and is a faithful servant. And so I know for him it's been a heartache. It's tough for, someone outside the family to watch. But boy, for Paul, it's been even more difficult. And in a way, him having dementia now has been a blessing for him because I think he's not really aware of the destruction and devastation, that has beset his kids and his grandkids. And so I'm kind of thankful that he doesn't really know what's going on. He just doesn't, his memory and his cognitive abilities just don't allow that. And I think it's a blessing for him. I also wanted to look at verse 9. This was one of Ron Armstrong's favorite verses. It's better to live in the corner of a roof than in a house shared with a contentious woman. And then if you also look over to verse 19, there's a very similar thought. It's better to live in a desert land than with a contentious and vexing woman. You get the feeling like Solomon speaks from experience. And how many wives and concubines did Solomon have? Too many. He had 1,000 altogether. He had 700 wives, 300 concubines. And there was going to be a few contentious people in that mix. And you can tell that the fact that he has that almost the exact same thing duplicated twice in the same chapter, this must have been really weighing on him at this point in his life as he's writing this. He must be thinking, what in the world why did I make these bad decisions and surround myself with contentious people? And you can tell he's thinking, man, I'd rather be up on the roof in the corner than having to deal with some of these women. And I don't think this just applies to women. I think this can apply to anybody. You have to be careful, not to become a person that is contentious. And in some ways, I feel like gossip goes along kind of with somebody who's contentious. Sheila always used to tell me the story about the town that they lived in. She would walk with her dad to the market, and they would always go by this one street, and at the end of the day, there would just be all these old women out there sitting, and Sheila would always ask her dad, well, what are those women, they're always sitting there every evening when we come back from the market. And he goes, oh, they're waiting for the cows to come home. Literally, they're waiting for the cows to come home. And he's like, don't be like these women, because these are gossiping, contentious women, essentially is what he told her. You don't want to be like them. Because all they would sit there is, they would take that opportunity to sit together, and all they were doing was talking about the town gossip while they were waiting for the cows to come home. And he was like, please don't be like them. And at the time, her father wasn't even a Christian, but that was just common sense, good advice that had evidently been passed down from generation to generation to him and then to Sheila. Don't do that. And I think that's exactly, what Solomon is saying here. Some people just love to talk about others. Some people love to complain. Some people love to be contentious. And those are, I would say, out of all of the issues that the eldership has to deal with, that's probably the most frequent. It has to do with issues of contentions with one person with another, or gossip issues in the church. That's been my experience over the last 15 years, is that that has been one of the most destructive issues within the church. And I always try and put a stop to that. And it's amazing at how the reaction is to when you try and put a stop to that kind of activity. A lot of times they just look at you like, what's wrong with you? We're just gossiping here. But gossip is malicious, and it causes contentions. And so Solomon's advice is very appropriate there. Let's skip down to the very last verse. It says, "The horse is prepared for the day of battle, but the victory belongs to the Lord." The horse is prepared for the day of battle, but the victory belongs to the Lord. What do you think that means? I agree. I think it definitely intimates that it doesn't matter what kind of weapons of war you've got. It doesn't matter how well your horses are trained, or your spearmen are trained, or your archers are trained. The battle belongs to God. He is in complete control. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about a spiritual battle or a physical battle, but God is in complete control. And I feel like this chapter ends very much the way it started, talking about God is in control. Remember the first one, talking about the king's heart, and it's just kind of like putty in God's hands. He's in control. He raises them up. He brings them down. He controls through his providence how their heart acts. He can direct them. And now at the very end, he's saying kind of the same thing. I'm in control. You can prepare the horses for battle, but the victory is going to be mine. What a powerful thing to remember